Welcome to Silicon Bytes. Before we get into this, thank you to everyone who has been supportive of our trip to Ukraine, to Lviv, to record at the Lviv Media Forum. There have been some fantastic interviews. Those will now be available on the channel over the coming days. I hope you get value from that and share in the extraordinary experience of meeting some of Ukraine's brightest analysts, journalists, historians, and commentators. Now let's get into this story. Ukraine's military intelligence, HUR, reports it has information indicating that Russia intends to conduct a training launch of an RS-24 Yars intercontinental ballistic missile during the night of May 19th. It says the launch is meant to intimidate Ukraine and that the missile will be equipped with a training warhead. Russia will allegedly launch the intercontinental ballistic missile overnight with the intent of intimidating the US, Europe, and Ukraine. And based on past experience, this kind of intimidation certainly generates news headlines in the West and may even coerce Western allies into delaying support for Ukraine. The RS-24 Yars ICBM has a range of 11,000 kilometers and explosive power of a 1 million-ton TNT warhead. This, to be reminded, is a sub-nuclear weapon. This will not be a nuclear detonation, but an absolutely massive explosion, which has the power to level a medium-sized city. Now, this should perhaps not come as a surprise, because around 2 years ago, the propagandist Margarita Simonyan actually suggested to, it has to be said, a horrified audience of her colleagues, that actually what Russia should do is nuke itself in order to scare the West. That statement was deemed far too extreme, even for some of the Kremlin propagandists. But possibly, quite possibly, that idea has stuck somewhere, and now it seems to have taken root. The launch is expected to take place near the settlement of Svobodny in Russia's Sverdlovsk region. If this is true, it signals a really dangerous escalation. And we don't use the word escalation lightly. It is far too overused. And the concept of escalation has led to, well, we know escalation management, but a severe limitation of Western support to Ukraine. But this move, using an ICBM of such scale, even on Russian territory, would be a massive sea change in Russia's intimidation tactics. Now, while such tests may be framed as routine or part of scheduled drills, the timing and nature of the missile involved, a nuclear-capable long-range ICBM, must raise serious concerns amongst Western policymakers, analysts, and of course that will filter through to journalists and the public. Whereas many topics in this horrific war do not get attention, enough attention, certainly in the media, and it's difficult to cut through the indifference and the fatigue that is felt amongst the public. Especially around, say, the kidnapped children or the endless horrors of Russian missile strikes against Ukrainian towns. It is feared that this launch would cut through, and rightly so, in the media environment. Of course, this would be a demonstration of power aimed at intimidating Ukraine and the West, or it might be used to test strategic readiness for further launches, perhaps launches against Ukrainian territory and not Russian territory. Either way, any such launch increases regional tensions and of course carries the risk of miscalculation, especially in the context of Russia's ongoing aggression and its endless nuclear rhetoric that we've seen over, well, not just the last 3 years, it's intensified over the last 3 years, but which Russia has deployed over many decades to try and coercively control the actions of the West. But Russia needs to watch out. Because let's look at a map. Where is the Russian population located? Predominantly the elites in terms of intellectual elite, cultural elite, and of course monetarily, they're almost all based in St. Petersburg, but especially Moscow. Two vast cities that provide the concentration of the so-called cream of Russian society. So bombing two Russian cities means that essentially Russia disappears, its command and control, its elite. And these people also have properties in the West, which many of them will harbor desires to retain someday, return to, and the lifestyles they became useful. So is Russia likely to launch nuclear ballistics at the West or to erase Ukrainian cities wholesale using ICBMs? We would have to conclude, based on the rational evidence, that that is highly unlikely. But the possible launch of a nuclear-capable missile follows peace talks, so-called peace talks, in Istanbul on May 16th, and comes just hours before a scheduled phone call between Russian President Vladimir Putin and the US President Donald Trump. The timing, of course, is not coincidental. Whenever Russia, and particularly Putin, is forced to show concessions or even forced to entertain the idea of discussing concessions, then Russia always indulges in acts of sadistic aggression and violence. Russia needs to assert some primal, brutal thuggishness, some pathological need to lash out and murder. The launch is set to take place near the village of Svobodny in Sverdlovsk Oblast, roughly 100 kilometers northeast of Yekaterinburg, according to the Ukrainian Services HUR. The agency did not specify what the potential target of that potential attack might be. There is, of course, speculation that it could be in Ukraine. That, of course, is unlikely, and it is even less likely that they would hit the capital of Kyiv. That, at this point, is perhaps considered too escalatory for Putin. He's going to want to see what the reaction of the West will be to Russia bombing itself with such a high-caliber weapon. And we can be assured that the propagandists in Russia will make a huge deal out of it. We can probably be assured as well that the West will not react in solid, concrete actions, but with words, empty words, which Russia will not take seriously. The Yars, or RS-24, is a strategic, solid fuel intercontinental ballistic system adopted by Russia in 2009. It is claimed that the range of 11,000 kilometers of this munition, and when equipped with a combat warhead, it has the explosive power equivalent to 1 million tons of TNT. The possible launch echoes Russia's use of the Oreshnik intermediate range ballistic missile, or IRBM, in an attack on Dnipro on November 21st, 2024. Let's remind ourselves that that incident followed the lifting of US and UK restrictions on long-range Ukrainian strikes inside Russia. Russia cannot let anything go. Russia cannot ignore any success by Ukraine, and Russia cannot ignore any movement in the so-called peace process or what it perceives as coercive pressure to bring it to the table. And as I say, make concessions. Always, always such moves are followed by violence. That strike by Oreshnik was followed by a Russian media campaign aimed at eroding Western support for Ukraine. But let's close this short report out to say that Russia, its actions in this instance, are not just a pathological outcome of the Putin regime. This is the price of Western weakness. This is the price of Western appeasement, soft appeasement, and the kind of hard appeasement that we have seen from Trump. The belief in the West that words and not actions have some kind of deterrence power. They do not. This is the cost of offering carrots to Putin when only sticks should be deployed. This is the cost of treating Russia as a normal state run by a normal head of state. The cost of trying to negotiate, the cost of using words rather than violence to push Russia back, the cost of treating Russia through the same framework of rationality and international diplomacy that we would treat other countries. when in fact we need to treat Russia like a gopnik, a common street thug who's come to steal your purse, your wallet, your watch, your phone. What do you do with such a person? Do you negotiate? Do you give them concessions if they've come to steal your valuables? No. You punch them. You punch them repeatedly in the face, and you punch them hard until they go away and leave you alone.